Hello, everyone. This lesson is going to be on allergies, autoimmunity, and immunization or vaccination. Allergies certainly do seem to be on the rise, and that can be for various different reasons. People may just be more aware of allergies and might be reporting more allergies. Also, some indication that the environment that we do live in, especially in the Western world, a somewhat sterile environment, results in a lack of exposure to things that would trigger immune responses, exposure to different allergens, and maybe our immune system isn't being trained properly early on. And also some studies indicate that it may have something to do with the microorganisms that we do find living in and on our body, our microbiome. And again, they may not be possibly training our immune system properly. At any rate, allergies, they certainly can be harmful immune responses to things in the environment that, well, they are antigens because they do trigger an immune response, but in reality, they're not truly harmful. So if we do take a look at this picture here that's showing some things that people might be commonly allergic to, so it might be things in plants, animal scratches, pollen, latex, bee stings, medications, various different things that people are exposed to. And hopefully you realize that if we talk about something like pollen, it's not harmful to most people. So in and of itself, pollen doesn't really cause a problem. It really only causes problems for people that are allergic to it. Other things in the environment as well, common things that people are exposed to, insect stings, whether it's bees or wasps, medications, common medications include things like antibiotics, penicillin, that people might take that they are allergic to as well. So what exactly is going on if someone does have an allergy, and what are some of the effects of that allergic reaction? This picture again is just kind of focusing on not just allergens in general, but this one is for food. So many different things that people do consume that they might end up being allergic to. So it really is an inappropriate response, and not only is it an inappropriate response of your immune system, in some cases it's an over-the-top response, which can lead to significant life-threatening complications when in fact it is a non-life-threatening substance. So a lot of it does come from or is initiated by a signaling molecule produced and released by what are called mast cells in your body. And this signaling molecule in the immune system is called histamine. So it targets cells within your body and it kind of instructs your cells what to do. So in the case of histamine, it does target, or one of the targets are blood vessels, and it results in increased blood flow into that particular infected area. So if someone does have a sliver, for example, you may have some bacteria or viruses that are introduced along with that sliver, so you do want to have an increased blood flow into the area in order to deal with that potential infection. So if we take a look at the picture down below, so again, all of these are the effects of this histamine signaling molecule released when there is exposure, typically to a different pathogen. So one of the things that it does result in is the dilation of the blood vessels. In other words, the capillaries, they get wider. So that's what it's showing in this picture here. And each one of these kind of vertically, it's showing a different stage in terms of the effects of histamine. So here we can say that the capillaries, they are wider. And what that really does is it results in or allows for an increased blood flow into the area. So why may you want an increased blood flow into the area? Well, inside of the blood vessels, remember, you have the red blood cells. That's mostly what we see here. We also have the white blood cells, of course, which are important for fighting off infections. We have platelets for sealing up blood vessels, and all of this is floating around in the plasma. So by having an increased blood flow into the area, what we really want is to get more white blood cells going into the area, just in case there are some bacteria or viruses, other pathogens that have been introduced. And quite often, these pathogens are not inside of the blood vessels, but they're on the outside. So what we want to do is get these white blood cells, in fact, outside of the blood vessels. And to allow them to get outside of the blood vessels, we need to increase the permeability of the blood vessels themselves. So there are cells that line the blood vessels, they're called the epithelial cells. And when we have increased permeability, now what we have are these kind of gaps in between the lining of the blood vessels. So that allows the white blood cells to get out where they can search around for bacteria and viruses and whatever other pathogens there might be. But what it also allows, this is just representing the fluidy portion of the blood that's also escaping to the outside, the plasma. So we also have fluid release into the surrounding tissue. So what that all results in, increased blood flowing into the area is going to increase temperature. More blood, which is mostly red in color, of course, is going to increase the redness. Because we have all this fluid that's going into the surrounding area, we have what is referred to as edema or swelling that's taking place. And associated with all of those is going to be tenderness and pain as well. So kind of getting back to the white blood cells, we do want to have the white blood cells or the leukocytes that are escaping to the outside, but some other kind of side effects that are associated with this as well. If it is fairly localized where you do just have that sliver, it doesn't really create any problems. It's only in that area that we do see all of this here. The heat, the redness, the swelling, the tenderness, the pain. But if this is taking place throughout all of your body, then it is referred to as a systemic response. And if someone does have a severe allergic reaction to a particular allergen that they are exposed to, then this is what can lead to significant systemic responses, which can end up being life-threatening. So signs and symptoms. Signs are something that you can see on the person. Symptoms are typically something that you can't necessarily see, but the person will tell you. So all of these, you're probably familiar with some of them, especially if you have allergies. What are some of these signs and symptoms? Well, cough and an itchy nose, runny nose to go along with it, sneezing, redness, itching, and so on. So if we take a look at a sign would be something like the vomiting. A symptom is something, again, that you can't see, so they might tell you that they're nauseous, and that would then be a symptom. But these are fairly typical. Not necessarily all of these people would experience if they do have an allergic reaction. It will vary from person to person, and also depending upon what the allergen is that they're actually exposed to. So what can someone actually do if they do have an allergy and if they are exposed to that particular allergen? Well, the simplest thing is to, well, not encounter it in the first place. So that's what this picture here is trying to show. Avoidance is what it is. So whether it is the animal dander, whether it is the pollen that's coming from trees and grasses in the springtime, easiest thing, well, maybe easier said than done, is to actually avoid it. So that's easy to do, perhaps. If it is something like a nut allergy, you simply avoid eating the nuts. But if it is pollen, kind of difficult in the springtime to avoid something like pollen. If you are exposed to it, a whole bunch of just over-the-counter medications that you can buy. So all of these, there's kind of the trade names here, the Benadryl and the Reactin. So all of these, what they are antihistamines. If we just kind of go back, what's leading to all of these different effects that we see here, the heat, the redness, the swelling, and possibly these systemic effects as well, it does come down to the histamine. So an antihistamine, is what's going to counteract the effects of the histamine itself. And at the bottom here, you may have seen something like this before. Trade name that this goes by is EpiPen. And EpiPen is an auto-injector where it does inject a hormone, a medication into the person's thigh, a large muscle as we can see here. And this hormone that is injected, it is epinephrine, also goes by the name adrenaline. So that is why it is called an EpiPen, epi for the epinephrine. And as we'll see, that's really when there is a severe allergic reaction, what is referred to as anaphylaxis, or as I have it here, anaphylactic shock. So anaphylactic shock is a serious, potentially life-threatening condition when someone is exposed to a particular allergen and they have a severe allergic reaction. So we already saw that one of the effects of histamine is dilation of the blood vessels. So locally, this isn't a problem. Systemically, it creates a huge problem in terms of blood pressure. What anaphylactic shock also results in, though, it's dilation of the blood vessels, but it is constriction of the airway passages. In other words, they get smaller, and that makes it more difficult for air, for oxygen to get down into the lungs. So it's because of these effects, if they are systemic, that this can potentially be life-threatening. So in this graph that we're taking a look at here, this is someone that has been stung by a bee, and they do have a severe allergic reaction. So if we kind of take a look at the bottom here, first of all, so this is where the person is stung by the bee at time 0. And if we take a look at the blood pressure, we can see it doesn't take very long at all, just a few minutes before, well, their blood pressure essentially drops to 0. So if it drops to 0, that means you're not circulating the blood around to your vital organs, including the brain, and this person is going to end up dying fairly quickly. If we take a look at the heart rate crashes at about the same time, as does the breathing. They're not breathing, their heart isn't beating, their blood pressure drops. This person is going to die fairly quickly unless something is done. So right here, it says that we have an injection of, and again, here they have it as adrenaline, but it is epinephrine that is in the EpiPen. So here they have been given an injection. So whether it is using a needle or whether it is the auto-ejector in the form of the EpiPen, what we see is that very, very quickly, it's going to restore the blood pressure. The person's heart is beating again. It opens up their airways, and they're going to have more air and more oxygen going into the lungs. So this is a life-saving measure for someone that is experiencing anaphylaxis and anaphylactic shock. We can also see here, so now we're talking about in terms of hours, really important that if someone has injected themselves with the epinephrine, they don't forget about it. They do still get themselves to a doctor, get themselves to a hospital, because as we can see here, things might be going really, really good, but then they crash again, maybe a couple of hours later. So that's why they should be under medical supervision if they do give themselves, or if someone does give them, an injection of the epinephrine. So the next topic in this lesson, kind of a short one, just on autoimmune diseases. So in this case here, auto is referring to yourself, your own cells, tissues, and organs. Autoimmune, what it really means is your immune system is attacking and destroying your own cells. Now, if you do have cells in your body that have been infected by a virus, you actually do want to destroy them. You do want to have your cytotoxic T cells find those infected cells and actually kill your own cells because they're not performing normally. If you have cancer cells, your immune system, once again, your cytotoxic T cells should find those cancer cells and should end up destroying those as well. But those are cells where there's something wrong with them. In the case of autoimmune diseases, your immune system attacks and destroys not cells where there's something wrong with them, but they are cells in your body that are perfectly fine. They are healthy cells. And of course, this is what we don't want to happen. So why is this the case? Well, unfortunately, it's not entirely understood. But remember, there are those things sticking out of cells, the identifying molecules, which are glycoproteins. So for your own cells, your immune system, your white blood cells will take a look at these glycoproteins sticking out of your own cells and will recognize them. What happens, or what seems to happen with an autoimmune disease, is for some reason your immune system no longer recognizes them. So that could be due to mutations to the DNA, resulting in different glycoproteins on the surface that your immune system doesn't recognize anymore. Infection of those cells by a virus might change how they look on the surface. Exposure to other just sort of general things here, drugs, environmental chemicals, and strong indication as well, suppressor T cells, or what are referred to also as Tregs. There might be some sort of a deficiency in how they function. So one of the things that these Tregs do is they tone down your immune system so it doesn't just go crazy and attack any cell type, but it will only attack things that are in your body that shouldn't be there. So maybe a problem with those suppressor T cells, or the Tregs. So just a few things on autoimmune diseases and some common ones. So right in here, diabetes, metabolic disorders like diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, that is now recognized as an autoimmune disease where that person's immune system actually attacks and destroys specific cells within the pancreas, which are called the pancreatic beta cells. For arthritis in the joints, various kinds of arthritis are autoimmune diseases. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is an autoimmune disease. You see down a little bit further here, lupus, systemic lupus, autoimmune disease. Here it has it as systemic sclerosis, but multiple sclerosis, very common in Canada, multiple sclerosis, and that also appears to be an autoimmune disease where that person's immune system is attacking, destroying some cells that you find on the outside, cells that are supporting the nerve cells within your body. So all of those are considered to be autoimmune diseases. The final topic in this lesson, again, really, really important, immunization, also referred to as vaccination. So I have here a table of just a whole bunch of different diseases for which we do have vaccinations for. So influenza is really the flu, so we have the annual flu vaccines. There are vaccines for pneumonia. Other ones here you would have heard about and hopefully have also had these immunizations, so things like tetanus, childhood vaccination protocols that we see here. So MMR is a combination vaccine, which is for measles, mumps, and rubella. HPV, you might be familiar with this one. HPV stands for human papillomavirus. It is responsible for, so they say, about 90% of cervical cancers in females, and possibly prostate cancer in males as well. If you're traveling, you may have had vaccinations for hepatitis, possibly for yellow fever as well. So many, many different vaccinations that we do have for many, many, many different diseases, whether they're childhood diseases or diseases that we might find in other countries, like in tropical countries. So what is actually done with an immunization or a vaccination? Really important to realize, huge misconception. If you get a vaccine, that vaccine cannot possibly give you that particular disease. That is simply not possible. So something is injected into the person. What is being injected is either a dead or weakened, what is referred to as an attenuated pathogen. So whether it is a bacteria or a virus, so it cannot possibly harm you, or it's not even the entire pathogen, it may just be the glycoproteins, which would serve as an antigen and trigger an immune response. So this is the key, it's inside of your body, and there is that antigen that's now inside of your body. It will trigger that entire immune response. So the helper T cells activated, which turn on specific cytotoxic T cells for that antigen, the antibody producing B cells for that antigen. You go through the entire immune response, but really important to realize that there's actually no harm that could come to you from this injection and the immune response, because you're not really being exposed to a pathogen that could cause you harm. It's dead or it is weakened. But this is really the key. It is the memory cells. Remember that after an immune response, we have these long-lasting memory cells, the T and the B memory cells that last for a long period of time. It might be years, it might be decades, depending upon what the disease is. It might be for the person's entire lifetime. So now if the person is actually truly infected by the pathogen at some time in the future, the pathogen that really could make them sick, well, now what your immune system now has are the memory cells. And because it has the memory cells, we've kind of tricked your immune system in this case. We've tricked your immune system into thinking that it has been exposed to the pathogen when in fact it hasn't really. So if we kind of walk through this process, so this here is then going to be, I'm just trying to get my pen back here, it's disappeared. What we're injecting into the person is the pathogen that is attenuated. So it is weakened, it is dead, it cannot actually harm the person. Okay, so yes, it might be the entire pathogen, but it can't actually make the person sick. When they do inject it, they might inject it along with something just to kind of help out with the immune response, called an adjuvant, and then the inoculation or the vaccination or the immunization. That's what they're actually injecting into the person. So again, you go through the entire immune response, but this is the key here. It's to produce the memory cells. So these memory cells, again, they're going to stick around for a long period of time. And if you do come across that true actual pathogen with the antigen, now because you have the memory cells, you can get a much, much quicker immune response. And in fact, that person may not even realize that they have been infected by the pathogen. So this last picture that I do have here, this shows a whole bunch of different diseases going down the left-hand side and the death or morbidity due to these different diseases. So this was prior to the use of vaccination, and this is now post-vaccination. So this is now in 2016. So smallpox, we pretty much consider it to be eradicated. In other words, it is gone. So prior to smallpox vaccinations, many people did die from smallpox. Now how many are dying? Well, none are dying from it. So 100% effective in terms of completely eliminating or eradicating smallpox. Other ones that are pretty close, polio kind of shows up occasionally in some developing countries around the world, but for the most part, that is also being completely eradicated. Sometimes we do hear about measles popping up again, but take a look at the change due to vaccinations, much greater than a 90% drop in the case of the measles. In the case of why we're starting to see things like this, really kind of unfortunate, but it has to do with, it appears, people seem to think that it has been eradicated, it's not an issue, it's not really that big of a disease anymore. People aren't getting their normal childhood vaccinations, and this would be one of the normal childhood vaccinations, and it appears that's why we're starting to see also an increase in some of these once again because of some people that are refusing these vaccinations.